been lying about the sun in Colorado, and I have to tell you that I'm very sad about it.
Lying as in like it's not as sunny as people think, or
Well, I
it's
have
hidden
been.
that it's over 300 days of sunshine, but that could only be for part of the day.
Well, so here's the thing. I was going to write this article, and I did write this article, and I was going to talk about how great it is to live in Colorado and how great it is to have more than 300 days of sun, which I've been saying since I lived there. And I thought, well, I better fact check myself. And I did, and it's a lie. It's a lie. Depending on where you are, it's somewhere between 250 and some other number. It's definitely not over 300. So I'm
Like
sorry
I
to
think that we're
everyone
gonna
I've said that to.
it would be getting into the definition of like what is considered a sunny day, the percentage of time that you might have clouds. Often in Colorado, it is very sunny in the morning, and that's typically followed by clouds in the afternoon, and
I still
often
think that counts. I think that
that
does.
counts as a sunny day.
I think so. I think
Okay.
so.
Californians might have something to say about that.
That they
It's like,
probably
well, we're sunny all the time in Southern California.
definitely in San Diego. And that was the myth. So that's what I have been saying. There's more sunny days in San Diego.
Yeah, I wouldn't dispute that.
I think we have to.
Wait, is Florida the Sunshine State?
I believe that to be true, although I'm not
It
an expert.
rains and it's all the time there.
True.
If you're tuning in from either of these states, please weigh in the comments below.
That's right.
Like and subscribe.
The people who know nothing about it are talking about it. What I can tell you is Michigan has never been nor will ever be known for our
It's
sun.
not disputed. I mean, I
That
spent most of I grew up in Missouri and Kentucky and can attest to the long sunnyless, no debate sunnyless days and weeks.
it is
But
very
I
real.
will tell you that when the clouds part and the sun comes out, there's this feeling of elation. Whereas I think if you're used to the sun all the time, you almost get tired of it. And we have sometimes I feel like the opposite here. Like we had a couple rainy days last week, and it felt great. It was just rained, and it doesn't do that very often. We typically get, anyways. We're not here to talk about meteorology or the differences between weather and climate. We're here to talk about, drum roll,
I think we're going to talk about mental well-being because it's mental health month,
it is. Yeah,
which is really great.
it is really great.
And I know you and I both care about this topic, and
We do.
reducing stigma
Yeah,
is a very big deal.
it is. I think even just simple podcast conversations about it can help. If you hear that other people are talking about it, you maybe feel the invitation to have a conversation about it. And it could even be like, something as relatively simple as it's a cloudy day. I'm feeling a little down today, and just recognizing that to, something as something more complex, like a real kind of diagnosed condition where you're hearing more people talk about it, which I think is really good. It's a
Yeah,
start.
agree. What would you say to a young professional about what would be and what wouldn't be appropriate to talk about at work relative to this?
Yeah, I think a lot about the value of vulnerability, and what is that right balance? Because I think in order for us to build relationships, there's a level of vulnerability that is required. It's not just a me thing. I mean, people talk about this all the time, and so I think getting building that trust level with people that you work with, and if you hear little bits where people kind of bring that up, I think that's an open invitation to share at least a little bit. So I think starting kind of smaller and being open to experiences that you have will also invite other people who are empathetic and um, emotionally intelligent to have those conversations. I don't know if I have a direct answer. Obviously, it's going to be situational, but certainly I think starting small and acknowledging, you know, uh, times where maybe you didn't show up your best, and having a conversation with a boss to say, hey, it's just a little bit of an off day and kind of here's why. I sure hope that uh, good leaders that I know would be really appreciative to understand and know, hey, this is what's going on with my person, and this kind of makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's smart. I do really appreciate your point about just starting small and talking about it. I've made a commitment to talk about the fact that I'm committed to therapy because I do think it matters that those of us that have continued to grow our career are going to step into talking about these kinds of hard things. And I am a really big believer in therapy and having a resource. And I don't think it's something we need to be ashamed of. And I think a lot of people feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my lovely wife is a high school counselor, and I'm in HR, and so I think we would fall into the category of like, yeah, so this is of course who I would stereotypically think about as being open to having these types of conversations. Um, so a few years ago, we were having some conversations about how to address some behavior issues with, um, our kids. We have three kids, and we had a really amazing experience with Denver University has a child psychology program where they have folks that are getting their PhD in psychology that are kind of working under the supervision of professional psychiatrists and psychologists. And so we wanted to go through an evaluation. We went through an evaluation, and we're having conversations about some of the behavior challenges of our kids. And I'll never forget this moment because we're talking, and it was about another one of our kids. And this like really kind person was like, I think you all would really benefit from some family therapy to address, you know. So here's my wife and I just kind of like, yeah, they're probably right. And so it was this like really, it was a light bulb moment for
Yeah.
me. And Andrea to talk about like, hey, there are some things from an outside perspective that we can learn that we can share some stories, share some situations on a weekly basis with a professional who isn't as emotionally attached to our kids, obviously, and the situation, who can introduce some tools. And I think that's oftentimes when people think about therapy and mental health, they just think about the couch or this opportunity to vent and breathe. And often, for me, I didn't think as much until I went through that experience about the tools that a good mental health professional can provide, that just really changed the way we looked at being parents. Because there's a lot of books on it, but there's not really like everybody has different perspectives. And so for us, that was really helpful.
Yeah. Well, and there's a spectrum for all of us about the set of needs and what I have really taken seriously is the idea of human potential. And I think that every day, every week, I have an opportunity to get better. And sometimes it is about relief, and sometimes it is about acute challenges I face in life. And sometimes it is about how do I continue to just get better as a person. And so I have a coach and I have a therapist, and those are very distinct support mechanisms. And they're really important because, the friends in my life don't wish to listen to me vent about things that I can vent about with my therapist. And I think a commitment to that level of support is important, whether you are in need of everyday life is hard, or if it is about something more substantial, which both can be true.
Absolutely. So you are well connected. You have a lot of friends. You're really thoughtful about the place where someone like a therapist versus a coach versus a mentor and a friend, based on the situation where they may be able to help you.
Mhm.
When you are approached by someone and someone asks you something, like how do you determine where you fit into that? Because oftentimes we blur that line, right?
Yeah.
Or I do, I should say. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm just like, having a conversation. And it's like, you know, the type of thing that someone might go to a therapist or a coach or something, it could be very different. So how do you determine the level of I don't want to say support, but what that conversation looks like?
One of the things that's helped me a lot with that is my volunteering with Crisis Text Line. They do a ton of training, and it is so much about asking questions. And then, more importantly than the questions, I think, is I very rarely ever, because of that training, want to be in a position where I'm saying this is what you should do. One of the fundamental tenets of the training that I went through there is about this idea that it's it's really helpful for people, especially when they are in a really dark time, to be able to come up with their own solution. And
Okay.
that can be very frustrating to people. And I want to say that that can happen sometimes when I'm volunteering and sometimes when it's in other parts of my life, because sometimes we just want somebody to say what we should do. And as human beings, the research would say, at least through that training, that it is so empowering when you can come up with the solution yourself. Now, having somebody walk with you in that and ask really important questions is critical. And so I think, to your specific question, it is about seeking to understand what role I can play, right? And that is super situational. If it's a friend, I'm going to be much more likely to dive deep into something. If it's somebody at work, I might ask some questions and understand what role I can play in terms of how serious or severe it is. And I have said to people, we've gotten to a place where I'm not going to be the best support, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to be. And how might I support you to find someone that could be? Because that is the thing I will say to you, Ryan, that I worry deeply about, is it can be really, really hard, particularly if you're in a dark time, to find a therapist. They're hard to find right now. It's very
Yeah,
expensive.
they are.
Frequently, our healthcare that we have may not cover it. And so even having the energy to find support can be hard. And so I think sometimes, even if I'm not the right person in that situation to provide direct support, I do think that there's a role that any of us could play in saying, hey, how might I help you find somebody that can?
Yeah, so I'm hearing, curiosity and understanding, and then
Mm-mm.
also boundaries, right? Like, or expect them if you're in that place where you're seeking help. I think knowing like, hey, there's going to be some potential limitations there, and it's not because we don't care or that that person doesn't care, but really like, you know, there are people that are trained professionals that provide those solutions, and then there's other roles that we can play as well.
Love to use the analogy when I'm talking about mental health to health. You would not, I am not a doctor. If you were having a problem with your foot, you would not
Yep,
want to guide you on that
that's
because
such a
I
good point.
know
Yeah.
about
Yep.
it.
Yeah, and that's such a good point because the seriousness of a mental health should be at or even above what we would consider, like a physical, you know, ailment. Like
No
they're all
question.
connected, right?
They are.
And I
Absolutely.
think we're seeing some change in the healthcare space where healthcare providers are seeing that relationship. And certainly here we have a mental health professional who helps navigate. They're not going to provide therapy, but they're going to certainly help with resources. And so I think we've seen a good shift in in the right direction.
I think that's definitely true. And I think each of us, again, the more that we talk about this, the more that we are comfortable doing so. And I still get very squeamish, right? I will go home tonight and I will think, oh, I talked about therapy, and it's going to be
Same.
on the podcast, and someone's going to listen and be like, she's super weak. It's a big, it's a big challenge because we spent a lot of our lives, at least thus far, having a different perspective, some having a different perspective about it. And I'm just really hopeful that the more that we walk through this and the more we talk about it, the different that that will be eventually.
Absolutely. And as you like young professionals, you you've probably had introduction to someone who's really suffering, or you yourself maybe, but I certainly know as the older that I've gotten, the more situations that I've come across where I've seen people suffering and wish I could help more. I wish other people had gotten that kind of help. And yeah, there's a lot of need for, and I think that continues to drive the conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. All right. So talk about it more. Even if the person you're talking to isn't the right resource, hopefully they will extend a hand toward a resource.
Yeah. And frankly, like, I think if you are listening and you're a young professional, know that like like keep an ear out too. There's a lot of folks that don't feel comfortable going to their company or going to their manager, but certainly a coworker or a peer. So I think your advice is really sound around kind of, listening, asking questions, understanding, and just kind of all of that alone might really make a big difference for somebody.
Agree. And the last thing that I would say, and this is something we think about a lot with Crisis Text Line, is, knowing for you, what are some things that provide you a little bit of relief? We started out talking about the sun. You might not be able to change whether or not it's sunny. It might be about hearing your favorite song or listening to something that distracts you, or even being in a public place where hearing other voices gives you a little bit of comfort. Understanding those things that can provide you just a tiny bit of relief.
Yeah.
I think it's something that all of us can have in our toolkit to activate, even if there isn't somebody immediately that might walk with us.
Yeah, we had Amy Leifer, who is our resource navigator, do a presentation for our all staff, our all people team meeting this week. And she actually talked about this idea of thinking about the things we can control and just how powerful that is.
Mhm.
And so, you look at, again, we talked about this, but you look at the news, the stock market, there are these bigger things to worry about. But then, yeah, spend the time worrying about it. But you can then turn and control and think about, how much am I putting away in my savings? Rather than doom scrolling, I'm going to go out and take a walk and maybe do podcasts instead. I don't know, but there are opportunities I think to really evaluate what we can control and control those, and that's just a really powerful message that I was reminded of this week.
Agreed. We cannot control what the world brings to our feet. We can control how we respond to it.
Yeah, and where we spend our time to some extent. I mean, I know we've got to go to work and we've got to care for ourselves, but I think if you really sat and thought about how much time you're spending on a regular basis doing X, Y, and Z, that is a thing you can shift and, find areas that give you joy to spend time in. I think we can all do a better job of that.
Yes. Okay, more joy. That seems like the right place to mic drop.
Sure.
All right, more joy, Ryan Brown. Yeah.